The cockpit door was wide open. 150 passengers aboard Flight 402 to London were settling into their seats, unaware that the real turbulence wasn't waiting in the clouds, it was happening right in front of row 1. Captain Geoffrey Halloway, a 30-year veteran with an ego larger than the Boeing 747 he commanded, stood over his seat, holding a flight manifest, like it was a piece of trash. He pointed a shaking finger at the calm, seated first officer. "I don't care what affirmative action lottery you won to get in this seat." Halloway's voice boomed loud enough for business class to hear. "You don't touch the FMC, you don't touch the radio, you sit on your hands, and you watch how a real pilot flies. If you so much as sneeze during takeoff, I will have your badge." He thought he was asserting dominance. He thought he was untouchable. But Captain Halloway didn't know two things. The quiet man he just called Unqualified was a legend in an arena Halloway couldn't even imagine, and the man sitting in seat 3A was about to end Halloway's career before the wheels even left the tarmac. JFK International Airport was drowning in a miserable November downpour, but Captain Geoffrey Halloway walked through Terminal 4 as if the sun were shining exclusively for him. He adjusted the gold stripes on his cuffs, ensuring the epaulets were perfectly straight. At 56, Geoffrey was the archetype of an airline captain, tall, silver-haired, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite, and an attitude that suggested he had personally invented aviation. He wasn't just a pilot for Monarch Airways. In his mind, he was the airline. He had flown the old 727s, the 747s, and now he was a check airman on the 777. He had a reputation, certainly. To management, he was reliable and precise. To the junior pilots and cabin crews, he was the butcher, a man known for making first officers cry over minor checklist deviations and reporting flight attendants for uniforms that were a quarter-inch out of regulation. Geoffrey checked his watch, a vintage Breitling, naturally. He was 10 minutes early for the briefing. He liked being early. It gave him more time to judge everyone else. He pushed open the door to the crew briefing room. The air smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. A few junior flight attendants looked up and immediately looked down, busying themselves with their iPads to avoid eye contact. They knew him. Everyone knew him. Geoffrey grabbed a coffee black and walked over to the scheduling computer. He punched in his employee ID to pull up the flight crew list for Flight 402 to Heathrow. "Let's see who they saddled me with today," he muttered to himself. He hated flying with the new generation. He called them Nintendo pilots kids who knew how to program a computer but couldn't hand-fly a visual approach if their lives depended on it. Last week he had kicked a 25-year-old off his flight for not having his shoes polished to a mirror shine. The screen flickered and loaded. PIC Pilot in Command, Heptiaset, Geoffrey Halloway, SIC Second in Command, FO Trevor Washington. Geoffrey frowned. The name didn't ring a bell. He mentally scanned the roster of the good old boys he preferred to fly with. No Washington. New guy. Geoffrey scoffed. Great. Probably fresh out of some regional prop job. He tapped the crew details tab. The photo loaded. Geoffrey's eyes narrowed. Trevor Washington was a black man, appearing to be in his late 30s. In the photo, he wasn't smiling. He looked serious, sharp. "Of course," Geoffrey whispered, a sour taste rising in his throat. He looked around to see if anyone was listening, then leaned in closer to the screen. Another box-ticking exercise by HR. Monarch Airways, where diversity matters more than altitude. It was a sentiment Geoffrey shared often, though usually only after 3 scotches at the hotel bar with other pilots of his vintage. He believed that the cockpit was the last bastion of meritocracy, and in his twisted worldview, anyone who didn't look like him or come from his background was an intruder. "Captain Halloway." The voice was soft feminine. Jeffrey turned. It was Sarah Jenkins, the lead flight attendant for the trip. She was a veteran, too, one of the few people Jeffrey tolerated, mostly because she knew how to make his coffee exactly the right temperature and kept the junior crew out of his way. "Sarah," Jeffrey nodded. "We ready?" "Cabin crew is briefed and ready to head to the gate, Captain. Just waiting on the FO." Jeffrey snorted. "Yeah, me too. I'm looking at his file now. Trevor Washington, never heard of him. Probably got his license in a cereal box." Sarah glanced at the screen, then back at Jeffrey, her expression unreadable. "Actually, Captain, I think I flew with him last month on a domestic leg. He's very quiet. Professional. Quiet usually means they don't know what they're doing and are terrified to ask," Jeffrey said, shutting down the computer. "Don't worry, Sarah. I'll fly the leg. I usually do when I get these diversity hires. I'll keep him busy with the radio so he doesn't break anything." The door to the briefing room opened. The room went silent, a reflexive reaction to a new presence. Trevor Washington walked in. He wasn't what Jeffrey expected from the photo. He was taller, perhaps 6'2", filling out his uniform with a physical presence that was more linebacker than pilot. But it was the way he moved that was striking. He didn't walk with the nervous hustle of a new hire. He moved with a slow, deliberate fluidity. His uniform was immaculate, sharper than Jeffrey's actually. The creases in his trousers could have cut glass. Trevor scanned the room, his eyes dark and calm. He spotted Jeffrey and walked straight toward him. He carried a battered leather flight bag that looked like it had traveled around the world a dozen times, starkly contrasting with the shiny new luggage most rookies carried. "Captain Halloway?" Trevor asked. His voice was a deep baritone, steady and devoid of the nervous tremor Jeffrey usually enjoyed inducing. Jeffrey didn't extend his hand. He just stared at Trevor, letting the silence stretch into awkwardness. It was a power move designed to make the other person scramble to fill the void. Trevor didn't scramble. He just stood there, waiting, his hand resting comfortably on the handle of his bag. "You're late, Washington," Jeffrey lied. They were still 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Trevor checked his watch, a tactical Garmin, not a flashy luxury piece. "Briefing start time is 18 hours, Captain. It is 17:55. I believe I am early." "If you're not 10 minutes early, you're late. That's how we operate on my ship," Jeffrey snapped. "I assume you have your documents, or did you leave them at home?" Trevor's expression didn't flicker. "I have them. Let's see them. License and medical. Now." This was highly irregular. Captains checked documents in the cockpit, not in the middle of the briefing room in front of the flight attendants. It was a public dressing down meant to establish hierarchy immediately. Trevor paused for a fraction of a second. He looked at Sarah, gave a polite nod, and then set his bag down. He unzipped the side pocket and produced a leather folder. He handed it to Jeffrey. Jeffrey snatched it. He opened the pilot's license, scanning for a flaw, an expired date, a type rating missing. Anything. Airline transport pilot. Multi-engine land. B737, B757, B767, B777. Type ratings. It was clean. In fact, Trevor had more type ratings than Jeffrey did. Jeffrey flipped to the medical certificate. Class 1. No limitations. "Valid." Jeffrey grunted, shoving the folder back at Trevor. "Barely. You barely have enough hours on the 777 to be insurable, I bet. How much time do you have on type?" "Enough," Trevor said simply. "Enough isn't a number, Washington. I have 12,000 hours in command. I don't want to have to babysit you across the Atlantic. Can you handle the radios, or is that too complex for you?" The insult hung in the air heavy and ugly. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. Trevor took his folder back, sliding it into his bag. He looked Geoffrey dead in the eye. "I can handle the radios, Captain, and the flying should the need arise." Geoffrey laughed a harsh, barking sound. "The need won't arise. I'll be doing the flying. You're just here to lower the landing gear and fill out the paperwork. Grab your gear. We're walking." Geoffrey spun on his heel and marched out, expecting Trevor to scramble behind him like a puppy. Trevor watched him go. He took a slow breath, adjusted his tie, and picked up his bag. Sarah walked up to him, whispering, "Don't take it personally, Trevor. He's difficult with everyone. He's old school." Trevor looked at Sarah, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "There is old school, Sarah, and then there is just a bully. I've dealt with worse than Geoffrey Holloway." "Just keep your head down," she advised. "It's an 8-hour flight. Don't give him ammo." "I don't intend to," Trevor said, "but I won't let him endanger the flight with his ego either." The Boeing 737-300 ER sat at gate B-32, a massive aluminum beast being fueled and catered. The rain lashed against the windshield as Geoffrey and Trevor settled into the cockpit. Usually this was a time of professional choreography. The captain and first officer would flow around each other, flipping switches, checking oxygen masks, and inputting flight data into the flight management computer FMC. Today it was a cold war. Geoffrey slammed his kit bag into the stowage compartment. He threw himself into the left seat, immediately putting on his headset to create a barrier. "I'll take the walk around," Trevor offered. It was raining hard, and usually the pilots would alternate, or the junior pilot would volunteer. "No," Geoffrey said sharply. "I don't trust you to check the tires. You'll probably miss a bald spot. I'll do it. You stay here and get the clearance. And don't mess up the route." Geoffrey grabbed his yellow reflective vest and stormed out of the cockpit, eager to get away from the man who irritated him simply by existing. Left alone, Trevor exhaled. He sat in the right seat and began his flow. His hands moved with practiced precision. He didn't just press buttons, he verified every system status. He pulled up the electrical synoptic page, checked the hydraulic quantities, and verified the oxygen pressure. He picked up the clearance from the printer. JFK to LHR. Kennedy 9, departure. Trevor began inputting the route into the FMC. His fingers flew across the keypad. He was fast, incredibly fast. He built the flight plan, checked the constraints, and cross-referenced the wind data in under 3 minutes. He was just finishing up when the sound of heavy footsteps returned. Geoffrey shook off his wet raincoat, spraying water everywhere, and squeezed back into his seat. "Wet out there," Geoffrey grumbled. "Plane looks fine. No thanks to maintenance. I bet they barely looked at it." He glanced at the FMC screen. He expected to see it blank or partially filled. Instead, the PRE Flight Complete message was displayed. Geoffrey frowned. He pressed the legs button to inspect Trevor's work. He scrolled through the waypoints looking for an error, a missing discontinuity, a wrong altitude restriction. It was perfect. "You put the winds in?" Geoffrey asked suspiciously. "Yes, sir. Updated from the ACARS." "What about the step climb at 30 west?" "Programmed. Flight level 370 at 30. West increasing to 390 at 20 west, based on the turbulence forecast." Geoffrey ground his teeth. He hated it when he couldn't find a mistake. It made him feel like he was losing control. "Well, verify it again," Geoffrey snapped. "I don't trust your typing. Delete it. I want to enter it myself." Trevor paused. "Captain, the boarding has commenced. We have a slot time in 20 minutes. Re-entering the data will delay us." "Are you questioning me, boy?" Geoffrey turned in his seat, his face reddening. "I said delete it. I am the pilot in command. If I say we enter the data by hand, we enter it by hand. Clear it." Trevor looked at the captain. This was irrational behavior. It was purely about dominance. But facing a command failure this early on the ground wasn't worth the fight yet. "Understood," Trevor said calmly. He reached out and cleared the flight plan he had just perfectly executed. The screen went blank. "Good," Jeffrey sneered. "Now watch and learn." Jeffrey began typing. He was slow. He hunt and pecked at the keys. He made a mistake on the third waypoint, typing Nantucket instead of the VOR code. He cursed, backspaced, and typed it again. Trevor sat silently watching the clock tick down. They were burning precious minutes. Outside the ramp, Agent plugged in his headset to talk to the cockpit. The chime rang. Jeffrey ignored it. "Busy!" he yelled at the empty air. "Captain Ground Crew is calling," Trevor said gently. "I hear them. I'm busy fixing your mess," Jeffrey shouted. Trevor pressed the talk button. "Flight deck, go ahead." "Captain, we're ready for push, but we're waiting on your beacon light," the ground crew said. "The ground? Stand by," Trevor said. "Don't tell them stand by," Jeffrey snapped. "Tell them to wait. I'm not done. That is what stand by means. Captain," Trevor said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. Jeffrey stopped typing. He turned slowly to look at Trevor. The cockpit seemed to shrink. "Listen to me," Jeffrey hissed, leaning over the center console. "You are on thin ice. I have friends in the chief pilot's office. Friends who can ensure you never fly anything bigger than a kite again. You think you're smart, you think you're special, because the airline has a diversity quota. You are nothing. You are unqualified." Trevor didn't blink. He didn't look away. "I am qualified to fly this aircraft, Captain. And right now, one of us is delaying the flight, and it isn't me." Jeffrey's face went purple. He was about to explode to scream when a shadow fell over the cockpit entrance. They both looked up. Standing in the doorway was a man in a suit. A very expensive suit. He was holding a briefcase and looked like a passenger who had gotten lost, but his demeanor suggested he owned the place. He was older, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" the man asked. His voice was mild, but it carried a strange weight. Jeffrey, eager to direct his rage at someone, snapped, "Get out of here. This is a sterile flight deck. Get back to your seat in first class before I have you arrested for interfering with a flight crew." The man raised an eyebrow. He didn't move. He looked at Jeffrey, then he looked at Trevor. His eyes lingered on Trevor for a moment, with a flash of recognition, but he said nothing to him. "I asked a question," the man said calmly. "I heard shouting. Is there a safety issue?" "The issue," Jeffrey spat, pointing at Trevor, "is that my first officer is incompetent and insubordinate. But that is none of your business. Now get out." The man smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized the prey was limping. "I see," the man said. "I'll take my seat. I certainly hope the flight improves from here, Captain Halloway." The man turned and walked back into the first-class cabin. Jeffrey slammed the cockpit door shut. Unbelievable. Passengers thinking they run the show. Did you see the nerve on that guy? Trevor was looking at the door, a thoughtful expression on his face. He recognized that voice. He couldn't place it exactly. Maybe a training video, maybe a conference, but he knew that wasn't just a passenger. Captain Trevor said, "We need to finish the setup. We are now 10 minutes behind schedule." Jeffrey huffed, turning back to the FMC. He finished entering the route roughly, and with 2 more typos he had to correct. "Checklist," Jeffrey barked. They ran through the pre-flight checklist. The tension was so thick it was suffocating. Every check from Jeffrey was a growl. Every response from Trevor was a measured, neutral statement. "Before start checklist complete," Trevor said. "Call for pushback," Jeffrey ordered. Trevor keyed the mic. Ground Monarch 402, ready for push and start. Monarch 402 pushback, approved, face east. As the tug began to lift the nose gear, Jeffrey looked out the window at the rain. I'm going to write you up the second we land, Washington. I'm going to file a report on your attitude, your lack of preparation, and your insubordination. You'll be lucky if you're flying cargo in Alaska by next week. Trevor looked at the instruments, watching the engine pressures rise as they introduced fuel. Focus on the start, Captain, Trevor said softly. Engine 2 is spooling. Jeffrey ignored the advice but watched the gauges. The engines roared to life. The vibration hummed through the floorboards. They taxied out to runway 31L. The queue for takeoff was long. Monarch 402, line up and wait, the tower commanded. Jeffrey guided the massive jet onto the center line. The runway lights stretched out into the dark, rainy abyss. You take the radios, Jeffrey commanded. I'll fly. And don't speak unless it's a safety call-out. I don't want to hear your voice. Understood, Trevor said. Jeffrey advanced the throttles. The engines spooled up to 55%. The power stabilized. Toga, Jeffrey said, pressing the takeoff arch go-around switches. The GR90 engines screamed. 115,000 pounds of thrust per side kicked them into the back of their seats. The plane surged forward, rattling down the runway. 80 knots, Trevor called out. Thrust set. Checked, Jeffrey said. V1, Trevor called. The point of no return. Rotate. Jeffrey pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The main gear left the ground. They were airborne. But as they climbed through 2,000 feet, piercing the heavy storm clouds, a violent bang shook the entire airframe. The plane yawed aggressively to the right. The master warning alarm screamed a piercing whoop, whoop, whoop. Red lights flashed across the dashboard. Engine failure, Jeffrey yelled, wrestling with the yoke. It's the right engine, engine number 2. Trevor scanned the instruments instantly. His eyes locked on the ICAS screen. Negative, Captain, Trevor shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. Engine 2 is stable. Look at the N1. It's a compressor stall on number 1. The left engine. Don't tell me what I feel. Jeffrey roared, his foot stomping on the left rudder. The wrong rudder. The yaw is pulling right. That means the right engine is dead. I'm shutting down number 2. Jeffrey's hand reached for the fuel control switch for the good engine. If he pulled that switch, there would be a heavy jet low to the ground, with 1 failed engine and 1 shut down manually. They would be a 300-ton glider falling into Queens. Captain, stop! Trevor lunged across the center console. Get your hands off! Jeffrey screamed, fighting him. You are shutting down the wrong engine! Trevor yelled, grabbing Jeffrey's wrist just inches from the switch. The cockpit was chaos. The alarms were blaring. The plane was banking dangerously. And in the back, 300 people, including the mysterious man in the suit, were holding their breath. The war for the cockpit had just turned into a war for survival. The cockpit of a Boeing 737 is spacious by aviation standards, but in that terrifying second, it felt like a coffin closing in. The master warning light pulsed a frantic red heartbeat against the dark, rain-streaked windshield. Let go of me! Jeffrey shrieked, his voice cracking. He yanked his arm, trying to break Trevor's grip. His fingers were inches from the fuel control switch for the right engine, the operating engine. Captain, look at the ECAS! Trevor roared, his voice, losing its calm veneer for the first time. He didn't let go. His grip was iron. Engine 1, N1, is fluctuating. The vibration is on the left. If you kill number 2, we are a glider at 2,000 feet. You're assaulting me. Mutiny! Jeffrey screamed, panic overriding all training. I am the captain. I say it's the right engine. The yaw kicked right. Because the left engine lost power, you fool, Trevor snapped. The plane lurched. With Jeffrey fighting Trevor and neglecting the controls, the nose dropped. The airspeed was bleeding away. The stick shaker, a mechanical device that vibrates the control column to warn of an impending stall, began to rattle violently. Clack, 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 stall warning, Trevor yelled. He made a split-second decision, a decision that would end his career if he was wrong and save 300 lives if he was right. Trevor shoved Jeffrey's hand back onto the throttle quadrant, releasing him, and shouted the phrase that legally transferred authority in an emergency. I have control. Trevor slammed his left hand onto his yoke and his right hand onto the throttles. He didn't wait for Jeffrey to acknowledge. He kicked the right rudder pedal hard to counteract the drag from the dead left engine, arresting the yaw. He pushed the nose down slightly to regain airspeed trading altitude for life. You do not have control. Jeffrey lunged for the yoke. I didn't give it to you. Trevor didn't look at him. He stared, laser-focused at the primary flight display. Captain Halloway, if you touch the controls again, I will knock you unconscious. Do not test me. The threat was delivered with such icy, lethal conviction that Jeffrey froze. He stared at Trevor, his mouth open, his chest heaving. He had never been spoken to like that. Not by a first officer. Not by anyone. Monarch 402 radar contact lost, say, altitude. The departure controller's voice crackled in their headsets, sounding worried. Trevor keyed the mic on the yoke, his thumb steady. Departure Monarch 402 is declaring an emergency. Engine failure on number 1. Severe compressor stall. We are maintaining 2,000 feet, turning heading 180. Request immediate return to JFK. Monarch 402, roger emergency. Turn left, heading 180. Climb and maintain 3,000. You are cleared for the ILS runway. 31 left. Souls on board and fuel. 312 souls. Fuel is heavy. We are 100,000 pounds over maximum landing weight, Trevor reported. Jeffrey was trembling. He looked at the engine display. He finally really looked at it. The gauge for engine number 1 left was flashing amber. The N1 rotor speed was erratic. The exhaust gas temperature was redlining. The gauge for engine number 2, right the one Jeffrey had tried to kill, was green and steady, producing the thrust that was currently keeping them in the air. Jeffrey swallowed hard. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He had almost killed them. He knew it, but his ego, a defensive fortress built over 30 years, wouldn't let him admit it. Instead of gratitude, a toxic sludge of shame and rage filled him. He made me look bad. He humiliated me. Read the checklist, Trevor ordered, not asking. Engine limit or surge, stall checklist. Now. Jeffrey sat there, paralyzed. Captain Halloway, Trevor barked. Do your job. Read the checklist. Jeffrey fumbled for the quick reference handbook, QRH. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped it. He flipped to the page. Auto throttle. Disengage. Jeffrey mumbled. Disengaged. Trevor confirmed, clicking the button. Thrust lever number 1. Retard until indications remain within limits, or lever is at idle. Trevor slowly pulled the left throttle back. The banging noise stopped. The vibration ceased. The plane smoothed out. Engine is at idle. Vibration has stopped, Trevor said. Continue. They worked through the procedure. Trevor flew the crippled heavy jet with the finesse of a surgeon. The rain was blinding, battering the glass. The crosswind was gusting at 30 knots. It was a nightmare scenario, single-engine, overweight, bad weather, hostile cockpit. We're heavy, Jeffrey said, his voice finding a bit of its old sneer. You're going to blow the tires. You'll collapse the gear. You don't know how to land a 777 this heavy. Set flaps 20, Trevor commanded, ignoring the commentary. Gear down. You're coming in too fast, Jeffrey criticized. You're high on the glide slope. Trevor wasn't high. He was perfectly corrected for the wind. He could see the runway lights piercing the gloom ahead. 2 whites, 2 reds on the PAPI lights. Perfect glide path. Tower Monarch 402 short final, Trevor said. Monarch 402 wind 290 at 32 gusts 45. Cleared to land, runway 31 left. Fire equipment is rolling. The runway rushed up to meet them. The ground proximity warning system called out the height. 50, 40, 30. Trevor kicked the rudder to align the nose with the runway, dipping the wing into the wind. It was a classic crosswind crab maneuver, executed flawlessly. 10, Trevor flared. He held the massive plane off the tarmac, letting the speed bleed off, waiting for the earth to rise. Smash! The main gear hit the wet concrete. It was firm, it had to be with that much weight, but it stuck. No bounce. Trevor deployed the thrust reverser on the single good engine and slammed on the brakes. The auto-brake system groaned. The plane shuddered violently as it fought the momentum of 300 tons moving at 160 miles per hour. "Keep it on the center line," Jeffrey yelled unnecessarily. Trevor wrestled the nose wheel, keeping them straight despite the wet runway trying to slide them sideways. They slowed. 100 knots, 80 knots, 60 knots. Monarch 402, turn left when able contact ground, Tower said. Trevor took the high-speed exit, bringing the aircraft to a stop on the taxiway. He set the parking brake. The cockpit went silent, save for the hum of the avionics and the pounding rain. Trevor exhaled a long, slow breath. He slumped slightly in his seat, the adrenaline crash hitting him. He turned to look at Jeffrey. "Are you okay, Captain?" Trevor asked. It was a genuine question. Jeffrey unbuckled his harness. He stared out the window at the flashing lights of the fire trucks surrounding them. His face wasn't relief. It was a mask of pure hatred. "You touched me," Jeffrey whispered. "You physically assaulted the captain of this vessel." "I stopped you from crashing the plane," Trevor said, calmly. "You laid hands on me," Jeffrey repeated, his voice rising. "That is a federal offense. Interference with a flight crew. Assault." He turned to Trevor, his eyes bulging. "You think you're a hero? You're done. I'm going to have you in handcuffs before you step off this jet. I'll strip you of your license. I'll ruin your life." Jeffrey grabbed the interphone handset to call the cabin. "Sarah," Jeffrey barked into the phone, "keep the passengers seated and tell the police to come to the flight deck immediately. I have a security threat in the cockpit." Trevor watched him, sadness in his eyes. "Don't do this, Jeffrey. Just let it go. We're alive." "Shut up!" Jeffrey slammed the phone down. "Don't speak to me. You're a criminal." The atmosphere at gate B32 was hysterical, although the passengers had been told it was a minor technical issue. Seeing fire trucks chase your plane tends to cause panic. Inside the cockpit, the standoff was absolute. Jeffrey had refused to run the shutdown checklist. He sat with his arms crossed, guarding the door, waiting for his retribution. Trevor had quietly shut down the engines and secured the aircraft systems from memory. He sat in the right seat, filling out the log book. Flight time 0.4 hours. Incident no. One engine compressor stall. Returned to JFK. He didn't write about the fight. He left the remarks section blank for now. There was a heavy knock on the flight deck door. Jeffrey leapt up. He unlocked the door and threw it open. Standing there were two Port Authority police officers looking wet and confused. Behind them was Sarah, the lead flight attendant, looking terrified. "Officers!" Jeffrey shouted, pointing a dramatic finger at Trevor. "Arrest that man. He assaulted me during the flight. He physically attacked me while I was handling an emergency. He endangered the lives of everyone on board." The officers looked at Trevor. Trevor was still seated, calm, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't look like a hijacker. He looked like a tired professional. "Sir," one of the officers asked Trevor. "Is this true?" Trevor stood up. He slowly reached for his flight bag. The captain was confused by the emergency. I intervened to prevent him from shutting down the wrong engine. It was a necessary action to preserve flight safety." "Liar!" Jeffrey screamed. Spittle flew from his mouth. "He grabbed me. He tried to take over the plane. I want him charged with mutiny. I want him off my ship." "Officers!" Jeffrey puffed up his chest, flashing his 4 stripes. "I am the pilot in command. Under maritime and aviation law, my word is law on this vessel. I am ordering you to remove this man." The police hesitated. They weren't pilots. They saw a senior captain accusing a junior officer. Hierarchy usually won in these situations. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," the officer said to Trevor. "We can sort this out at the precinct." Trevor nodded. "Fine. I will comply." He stepped out of the cockpit. Jeffrey stood in the galley smirking, a dark, victorious grin. He had won. He would spin the story. He would say Trevor panicked and attacked him. Who would they believe, the 30-year veteran or the new hire? Take his badge. Jeffrey spat at the cops. He doesn't deserve to wear it. "Excuse me." The voice came from the business class aisle. It wasn't loud, but it had the distinct, crisp timbre of authority that made everyone stop. Jeffrey turned. "I told the passengers to stay seated. Get back." He stopped. Walking toward them was the man in the suit from earlier, the one Jeffrey had yelled at, Arthur Penhaligon. Now that the cabin lights were fully bright, Jeffrey could see him clearly. He saw the bespoke tailoring. He saw the platinum pin on his lapel, a small stylized falcon, the logo of the Monarch Group, the parent company of the airline. Jeffrey's stomach dropped through the floor. Arthur Penhaligon wasn't just a passenger. He was the chairman of the board. He owned the airline. He owned the planes. He effectively owned Jeffrey. Arthur walked past the police officers as if they were furniture. He stopped in front of Jeffrey. He looked at Jeffrey with an expression of profound disappointment, like one might look at a dog that had just soiled an expensive rug. Mr. Penhaligon," Jeffrey stammered. I didn't know you were on board. I was just handling a security situation." "I know who you are, Captain Halloway," Arthur said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. "And I know what I saw. And I know what I heard." "Sir, this man," Jeffrey pointed at Trevor, his hand trembling. "He attacked me. Be quiet," Arthur said. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. Jeffrey's mouth snapped shut. Arthur turned to Trevor. The icy demeanor melted instantly. A warm, genuine smile broke across the chairman's face. He extended a hand. "Major Washington," Arthur said respectfully. "Or I suppose it's First Officer Washington now." Trevor smiled a tired, relieved smile. He shook the chairman's hand. "Good to see you again, sir, though I wish the circumstances were better." Jeffrey's brain was misfiring. Major again. "You know him," Jeffrey whispered, horror dawning on him. Arthur turned back to Jeffrey. The ice returned. "Captain Halloway, do you know who your first officer is?" He's a new hire," Jeffrey squeaked. "Diversity recruit." Arthur let out a short, dry laugh. It was devoid of humor. "Diversity recruit," Arthur repeated, tasting the words like poison. "Captain Halloway Trevor Washington is a retired United States Air Force major. He was a test pilot for the Skunk Works program. He has logged more hours in experimental aircraft at Mach 2 than you have spent driving your car. He is the only pilot in history to land a damaged B-2 Spirit bomber with partial hydraulics. I personally recruited him to join Monarch because we wanted the best aviators in the world to train our future captains." Jeffrey stared at Trevor, the quiet man, the man he had bullied, the man whose typing he had criticized. "And," Arthur continued, stepping closer to Jeffrey, invading his personal space, I was listening to the cockpit voice channel on the entertainment system. Channel 9. I heard the stall warning. I heard you identify the wrong engine, and I heard Major Washington save my aircraft and my life from your incompetence." The police officers took a step back, realizing the tide had turned violently. "Officers," Arthur said, not looking away from Geoffrey. "There will be no arrests today. However, please escort Captain Halloway to the terminal. His employment status is currently under review." But my union rep," Geoffrey sputtered, his face pale as a sheet. "You'll need more than a union rep, Geoffrey," Arthur said softly. "You'll need a lawyer. Get off my plane." Geoffrey Halloway, the king of Terminal 4, looked around. The flight attendants were staring at him. The police were staring at him. Trevor Washington was looking at him with nothing but pity. He slumped. The air went out of him. He grabbed his bag and walked off the jet. The rain outside soaking him the moment he stepped onto the jet bridge. Arthur turned back to Trevor. "Trevor," Arthur said, "are you all right to debrief, or do you need a moment?" "I'm fine, sir," Trevor said. "Just need to finish the paperwork." "Good," Arthur nodded. "Because this isn't over. Halloway is a snake. He'll file a report with the FAA claiming you assaulted him before I can fire him. He'll try to drag you down with him." "I expect he will," Trevor said. "We have a hearing in London in 3 days," Arthur said. "I need you on the next flight out, as a passenger. We're going to settle this once and for all at headquarters." Trevor nodded. "I'll be there." Arthur patted him on the shoulder. "Good flying, son. That crosswind landing was poetry." As Arthur walked away, Sarah, the flight attendant, exhaled loudly. "Holy cow, Trevor. Who are you?" Trevor picked up his bag. He looked at the empty captain's seat. "Just a pilot, Sarah," he said. "Just a pilot." London was grey-cold and utterly indifferent to Geoffrey Halloway's plummeting career. He sat in a high-end law firm in Canary Wharf opposite Leonard Salinger, a defense attorney known as the Shark of Heathrow. Salinger was expensive, vicious, and Geoffrey's only hope. "Let's go over it again," Salinger said, tapping his gold pen, "and try to look less like a man who knows he's guilty." Geoffrey straightened his tie. He had spent 48 hours crafting a narrative to save his license. "I initiated the takeoff roll. At 2,000 feet we experienced a yaw. As I reached to manage it, the first officer unbuckled and struck my arm. The blow caused my hand to slip onto the wrong fuel switch. The erratic flying, that was him. I was fighting a hijacker." Salinger smiled a cold, predatory expression. "That works. If we can prove he touched you before the error, he goes to prison. We'll paint him as a diversity hire who panicked under pressure." "What about Penhaligon?" Geoffrey asked, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "He was on the flight. He claims he heard it." "He heard audio," Salinger dismissed. "He didn't see the cockpit. We will argue your shouting was a reaction to being punched. The hearing is tomorrow. It's going to be a bloodbath, Geoffrey. But if you stick to that story that he hit you first, we win." Across the city, in a modest hotel room near Gatwick, Trevor Washington sat on the edge of his bed, reading a book on fluid dynamics to calm his mind. A knock at the door revealed Arthur Penhaligon holding 2 paper cups of tea. "Room service isn't what it used to be," Arthur joked, entering. He sat in the small armchair, his expression serious. "I spoke to legal. Halloway has hired Salinger. They're going to come at you, Trevor. They will claim you panicked. They want the angry black man to show up in that courtroom so they can point a finger and call you unstable." Trevor smiled a slow, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, I was the only black man in a squadron of 70 pilots for 5 years. I have had my skills questioned every day of my life. Geoffrey Halloway cannot make me angry. He can only make me disappointed. Arthur studied Trevor's face, seeing the steel beneath. They're going to use the voice recorder. It captures the shouting, but not the context. Trevor, I know what I heard, but I have to ask, did you hit him? Trevor looked Arthur in the eye. I applied the necessary force to remove a threat to the safety of flight, Trevor said formally. I did not strike him. I restrained him. Arthur nodded, satisfied. Good. Because tomorrow, Jeffrey is going to try to end your life. I want you to be ready to end his. The hearing room at the CAA headquarters was sterile, airless, and thick with tension. A long, curved table dominated the space behind which sat the adjudicators led by the stern, Dame Eleanor Vance. Jeffrey Halloway sat on the left, flanked by his lawyer, Leonard Salinger. He wore his full uniform, 4 stripes gleaming, looking every bit the seasoned commander. On the right sat Trevor Washington, alone in a simple charcoal suit, his hands folded on the table. The gallery was packed with airline executives, including the chairman, Arthur Penhaligon. This tribunal is in session, Dame Eleanor announced. We are here to review the events of Flight 402. Captain Halloway, you claim First Officer Washington physically assaulted you, causing the control error. Is that correct? Jeffrey leaned into the microphone. That is correct, ma'am. We had an engine surge. As I reached to manage the checklist, First Officer Washington, who had been erratic during pre-flight, struck my arm. He was screaming. He grabbed the controls. I was fighting for my life against a pilot who had snapped. Salinger stood up, smoothing his tie. We have statements describing Mr. Washington as aloof. We believe he suffered a panic-induced breakdown. Captain Halloway is a 30-year veteran. The idea that he would mistake a left engine for a right engine is absurd unless he was being attacked. Salinger sat down, looking smug. The narrative was set. The veteran versus the unstable rookie. First Officer Washington. Dame Eleanor turned to Trevor. Your response. Trevor stood up. He didn't look at Jeffrey. My response, ma'am, is that the flight data recorder will tell a different story. We have the data, Captain Vance, the Monarch chief pilot, said from the panel. He pressed a button, illuminating a large screen with a complex graph of colored lines. Let's look at the timeline. The graph scrolled. Time 18:42:15. Engine number 1 experiences a compressor stall, Vance narrated. The aircraft yaws left. Now look at the red line. This is the rudder input. The line spiked violently. Full left rudder is applied, Vance said. Left rudder? Dame Eleanor frowned. But the left engine failed. That would flip the plane over. Correct. Vance said, his eyes on Jeffrey. The pilot flying stepped on the dead engine. I was pushed, Jeffrey blurted out. He kicked the pedal. Wait, Vance cut him off. Look at the control column force sensors. Blue lines for the captain, green for the first officer. At the moment, the wrong rudder was applied. The green line is flat. Trevor Washington wasn't touching the plane. Jeffrey's face went pale. The force on the captain's controls, however, Vance continued, shows 80 pounds of pressure. Captain Halloway, you pressed the wrong rudder. You were flying the plane into the ground, alone. The sensors are wrong, Salinger objected. Let's play the audio, Dame Eleanor ordered. The cockpit voice recorder. The speakers crackled to life. The room listened in horror. Sound of engine roar. Loud bang, Halloway, hysterical. Engine failure, it's the right engine. Engine number 2. Washington, calm, urgent. Negative. Captain engine, 2 is stable. It's a compressor stall on number 1. Halloway, don't tell me what I feel, I'm shutting down. Number 2. Washington, you are shutting down the wrong engine. Pause, Vance ordered. At this moment, the fuel control switch for the good engine is touched. Someone is trying to kill their only source of thrust. He forced my hand, Jeffrey shouted. Resume. Sound of a struggle. Washington. I have control. Halloway. You do not have control. I didn't give it to you. Washington. Captain Halloway. If you touch the controls again, I will knock you unconscious. Do not test me. The recording ended in stunned silence. The data confirms, Vance said, that the correct rudder input, the input that saved the plane, was applied 1 second after Mr. Washington took control. Trevor spoke into the silence. I did not attack the captain. I watched him apply the wrong rudder and reach for the wrong switch. I warned him. When he persisted, I physically removed his hand to save the aircraft. Jeffrey was sweating profusely. His defense was crumbling. Desperation took over. He's a liar. Jeffrey stood up, his composure shattering. He's a diversity hire. He's not one of us. You're going to take the word of a rookie over me. I am Monarch. Airways. I have 12,000 hours. And I have 6,000 hours in the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, Trevor said quietly. Jeffrey froze. The room turned to Trevor. I didn't want to bring this up, Trevor said, sliding a thick file across the table to Dame Eleanor. But since my qualifications are in question, Dame Eleanor opened the file. Her eyes widened. Distinguished Flying Cross, she read aloud. 2 silver stars. Chief Test Pilot for the Skunk Works Classified Division, Commander of the 509th Bomb Wing. She looked up at Jeffrey with piercing disdain. Captain Halloway, you called this man unqualified. First Officer Washington was landing stealth bombers on unlit runways while you were sleeping in hotels. That's classified, Jeffrey stammered. I couldn't have known. You didn't ask, Trevor said. You assumed. You looked at me, and you decided I was incompetent because of the color of my skin. And that assumption almost killed 300 people. Arthur Penhaligon stood up from the gallery. Dame Eleanor Monarch Airways withdraws all support for Captain Halloway. We are filing for the immediate revocation of his license. Agreed. Dame Eleanor slammed her gavel. Captain Halloway, you are suspended pending a criminal inquiry. Mr. Washington, you are cleared of all wrongdoing. Thank you. Jeffrey stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. The king of Terminal 4 was dethroned. He looked at Trevor hoping for mercy. Trevor stood, collected his files, and looked Jeffrey in the eye. You were right about one thing, Jeffrey. You said I was just there to lower the landing gear. Turns out I was there to save you from yourself. Trevor walked out, leaving Jeffrey alone in the center of the destruction he had created. The tribunal doors sealed Jeffrey Halloway's fate with a heavy final thud. He walked out into the London drizzle, stripping the 4 gold stripes from his epaulets. For 30 years they had been his armor. Now they were just fabric in the pocket of a damp suit. Salinger, his lawyer, didn't even look up from his phone. You didn't just lose your license, Jeffrey. You committed career suicide on public record. He shoved a thick envelope into Jeffrey's chest. My bill. I'd suggest selling your boat. The lawyer stepped into the elevator, leaving Jeffrey alone in the hallway. The fall. The karma didn't hit all at once. It eroded him slowly. First came the termination letter from Monarch Airways. Gross misconduct, no pension. Then came the social exile. The old boys club ghosted him. No one wanted to be associated with the man who tried to shut down the wrong engine out of spite. 6 months later, his wife left, taking the house in the Hamptons. She had no interest in being married to a bitter, unemployed man who shouted at the television. Jeffrey spiraled. He applied to cargo carriers. Rejected. He applied to flight schools to teach novices. Rejected. The owner of a Florida school laughed in his face. The guy who stepped on the wrong rudder. I wouldn't let you fly a kite near my students. He eventually landed a job as a shuttle bus driver for a budget car rental agency at JFK. Every day, he drove the same loop, forced to watch massive jets take off over his head. The roar of the engines, once his symphony, became a deafening daily reminder of his failure. The rise. While Jeffrey drove circles in the rain, Trevor Washington soared. Monarch Airways promoted him to captain, but Trevor didn't stop there. He became the head of the new Human Factors Department, rewriting the training syllabus to prioritize assertiveness over hierarchy. He brought in his old Air Force colleagues to teach high-stress decision-making. Under his watch, the culture shifted. First officers were no longer silenced. They were empowered. Trevor became the face of the new Monarch Airways, calm, competent, and inclusive. The intersection 3 years later, Christmas Eve, Captain Trevor Washington stood on the jet bridge of a pristine Boeing 787 Dreamliner Flight 101 to Tokyo. He checked the manifest with Sarah, now the purser. "Full flight," she said. "We cleared the standby list, but it's packed." Trevor nodded, smiling at his young first officer, Emily. "Ready for your first Pacific crossing. Remember, we're a team. You see something, you say something." It was the exact opposite of the briefing room with Jeffrey 3 years prior. The passenger in 34E back in economy, squeezed into the dreaded middle seat of row 34, sat a man in a worn-out coat. It was Jeffrey. He was flying to Tokyo on a pity pass for a humiliating interview as a simulator technician, the guy who greases the hydraulics. He was jammed between a crying baby and a teenager playing a video game. His knees pressed painfully against the seat in front. The PA system chimed. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking." Jeffrey froze. The voice was deeper, richer, but unmistakable. "My name is Captain Trevor Washington. Welcome aboard our flagship service to Tokyo. Sit back, relax, and let us take care of you." The teenager next to Jeffrey paused his game. "Captain Washington. No way I saw a video about him. He's the guy who saved a plane when the other pilot had a total meltdown. He's a hero." Jeffrey felt the blood drain from his face. He shrank into his coat. "Yeah," Jeffrey whispered, his voice cracking. I heard that story." "That's awesome," the kid said, going back to his game. "We're safe as houses, man." The irony was a physical weight on Jeffrey's chest. He looked at his reflection in the dark porthole. He didn't see a captain anymore. He saw a dinosaur left behind by a world that valued skill over ego. The engine spooled up the high-pitched whine of the GenX turbines. The plane lifted effortlessly into the night sky. Up in the cockpit, Trevor Washington adjusted the heading bug, calm and content. He didn't know Jeffrey Halloway was in the back, miserable and alone. And truthfully, he wouldn't have cared. Trevor had a plane to fly. And that is how the king of Terminal 4 ended up in the middle seat of economy, flown by the very man he tried to destroy. It's a brutal lesson. Jeffrey Halloway thought his stripes and his tenure made him untouchable. He thought he could bully competence into silence. But gravity doesn't care about your ego. Gravity only respects skill and teamwork. Trevor Washington didn't win because he was lucky. He won because he prepared. He won because he knew that true leadership isn't about shouting orders. It's about listening to your team. Halloway lost everything, not because he made a mistake, but because his pride wouldn't let him admit he could make one. I want to hear from you. Have you ever worked for a Jeffrey Halloway, someone whose ego put the whole project at risk? How did you handle it? Type Team Trevor in the comments if you think justice was served, or second chance if you think Jeffrey deserved better. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice, please hit like and subscribe. Ring the bell so you don't miss our next story from the cockpit. Fly safe and keep your ego in check.